something? What if the person you were most afraid of, the one keeping you from real love, was never any of the men you dated? What if it was you? Not in a self-blame way, not in a fix yourself before you're lovable way. I mean something much more specific than that. What if part of you, the deep subconscious part, has decided that being truly loved is the most dangerous thing that could ever happen to you? I'm Lene, a certified rapid transformational therapy practitioner and a gay coach, gay relationship coach, and I work with gay men who are done cycling through the same toxic patterns, the unavailable men, the situationships, the heartbreak, and that somehow keeps finding the exact same shape. I help them go to the root of it and change it at the source. This is Ghosted, Gagged, and Gay. If this episode hits you somewhere tender, share it with one person who needs it. Follow the show also so you never miss an episode, and please leave a review. It really helps keeping this show going. So for now, I have a special story for you. So sit down because this story, it wrecked me a little. So every few weeks, I get a submission that stops me in my tracks. This one arrived in my inbox around 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, which honestly tells you everything about the headspace that this person was in when they wrote it. He asked me to stay anonymous. So he said he wasn't sure he was ready to read or to hear himself say that or say the story out loud. So I told him that's exactly why we're going to do it for you. So for today, he will go by the name Marco, and this is his story. I need to tell you about Luca first, because if I don't tell you about Luca, nothing else makes sense. It was the last week of August, the kind that Berlin almost never gives you. Still warm at midnight, golden and thick, the whole city stretched out loose and easy. So he lives in Berlin, just as a backstory. I was at a rooftop party in Neukölln. Neukölln is a district in Berlin. One of those parties that starts on a friend's terrace and somehow absorbs 20 people you've never met. I had a drink I didn't really want, and I was half checking my phone when I looked up and saw him. He was Italian, visiting for 5 days. He had that particular brand of effortlessness that I find both attractive and slightly offensive. He was leaning against the railing, talking to someone, laughing, and then he caught me staring and didn't look away. We talked until the party thinned out. Then we talked, walking to the canal. Then we talked until 4 in the morning, sitting on the steps of a closed bakery, eating the cigarettes neither of us smoked, just to stay outside a little longer. For 5 days, Luca was the whole city. We ate Spätzle, which is a dish, common dish, or like a famous dish in Germany, at a table too small for two people, and pressed our knees together and pretended that wasn't on purpose. We took the underground, which is called U-Bahn in Germany, to the lakes and lay in the sun saying almost nothing, and it felt like everything. On his last night, he held my face and said, "You should come to Milan." He said it like it was simple. I said, "Yeah, maybe." I meant, I'm already preparing for this to end. We kept texting after he left, sporadic at first, then suddenly constant. Long rambling voice notes, photos of things we saw that felt like they would make the other one laugh. He said Milan again. I booked a trip I hadn't told anyone about yet. And then the text started taking longer to come, not absent, just delayed, just enough to make me refresh, just enough to make my stomach drop every time I opened the app and saw the gray ticks. I noticed I was spending more time thinking about Luca than I was spending actually talking to Luca. But that felt normal. That felt like how it works. That felt like love. So let's pause here a little bit. So what Michael just described, that feeling on the canal, the electric vibes, the electric aliveness of it, the way Luca occupied his whole nervous system. That's real. I'm not going to tell you that wasn't real. It really was. But here's what I want you to sit with. Emotional unavailability doesn't feel like a red flag. It feels like a pulse. It feels like aliveness. It feels like an adventure. When someone is just out of reach, whether it's geographically or emotionally, or in terms of what they're willing to offer you, your nervous system doesn't register that as a problem. It registers it as a challenge. And challenges feel exactly like desires. So, challenge accepted. This is the thing about anxious and fearful attachment. The uncertainty itself becomes the drug. The gray ticks, the delayed replies, the yeah, maybe someday. They keep you in a state of low level activation. So they keep you close enough, but they don't let you go. And in that activated state, you confuse the anxiety for passion or for chemistry. So in like in simple words, you're not falling for the person, you're falling for the feeling of almost having them. So when Marco says that felt like love, I want you to ask yourself how much of what you've called love in your life was actually the high of something incomplete or unattainable. Because there's a difference, and learning that difference, that's where everything changes. So let's continue to the second part of the story. Here's the part I haven't told you yet. The part that makes me look less like a romantic and more like an idiot. 3 weeks before the party in Neukölln, 3 weeks before Luca, I had been on 4 dates with a man named Daniel. Daniel was 34. He lived in Prenzlauer Berg, which is another district in Berlin. He had a dry, specific sense of humor, the kind where you're never sure if you've been complimented or insulted, and you find yourself replaying it for hours because you want to get it right. He was a structural engineer. He had a cat called Mies, after Mies van der Rohe. And he had told me that on the second date, like it was slightly embarrassing, but honestly, I found it completely endearing. He texted back within an hour, always, not in a desperate way, in a way that said, I saw your message and I'm glad you sent it. He made plans. He suggested things and then followed through on them. On our fourth date, he walked me to my building and stood at the door and said, I'd like to keep doing this, if you're up for it. I said, I'll think about it. 3 weeks later, I was at a rooftop party watching an Italian man lean against a railing. I kept Daniel in a kind of holding pattern while the Luca thing unraveled in slow motion. I'd respond to his messages, but I'd take my time. I'd suggest meeting, but leave the date vague. Once he asked if everything was okay, and I said, yeah, just busy, in a way that was designed to satisfy without committing. My friends would ask about him, and I told them about him before the party. I'd said he seemed genuinely nice, and I'd shrug and say things like, I don't know, there's no spark, or he's lovely, but it feels a bit flat. Flat, I used the word flat for a man who texted back, who made plans, who showed up, who said clearly what he wanted. Daniel wasn't flat, Daniel was steady, and I had somehow decided that steady was the same as boring. Oh, Marco. One Saturday morning, he texted, I think I've gotten mixed signals from you. I'd rather just know. I sat with that message for 2 days. Then I told him I didn't think it was going to work. He said, okay, take care of yourself. I put my phone down and felt this enormous, inexplicable relief. 3 hours later, the relief was gone and something else had arrived in its place that I didn't have a name for yet. So let's stop here for a little bit. Um, Please write it down if you want to. Self-sabotage almost never looks like self-sabotage, especially if it's the sophisticated kind of self-sabotage. So Marco didn't exactly ghost Daniel, right? I mean, he just kind of withdrew, right? Incrementally, gradually, he introduced just enough ambiguity that the other person eventually had no choice but to name it and ask him to leave. This is, which, by the way, like Marco, sorry if you're listening to this, but it's a little toxic. Yeah, let's just call it as it is. But this is not the story. This is not our story. So this is what usually a sophisticated self-sabotage looks like. It's not a flame out, it's kind of like a slow fade, a series of small, deniable moves that add up to the same result, pushing away what's good for you. So the available, caring man is gone, and we can tell ourselves it just didn't work out, right? So what is the tell here? The tell here is always the relief. I mean, if you end something real and good and feel relief afterwards, not sadness, not ambivalence, but relief, ask yourself what you were actually afraid of. Because usually the answer isn't, I wasn't attracted to him. The answer is something much more uncomfortable. It's, he was starting to matter to me, and things that matter can be lost. And I'm scared of that. Unavailable people can't really hurt you. You never quite had them. But someone steady, someone who shows up, responds, someone who makes you matter to them, that person has actual power over you. And for a lot of us, that power feels catastrophically unsafe. So we burn it before it can burn us. Let's move on, the third part of the story. By October, Luca had become a bi-weekly voice note that I analyzed like a document. I had a friend who would sit with me while I replayed the intonation of specific words. I had posted 2 or 3 things on Instagram, sunset photos, mood boards, reels, that were absolutely about Luca and absolutely not labeled as such. My friends were in on the grief without knowing the full geography of it. I didn't tell them about Daniel. I went to Milan in November. I'll give you the summary. Luca was wonderful and distant, and the hotel room was perfect. And I cried in an airport bathroom on the way home, not from heartbreak exactly, but from a kind of recognition I didn't want to look at directly. He texted twice after that. I replied to both. He didn't text again. Oh, so sad. By December, I was telling myself a very clean story. I had been brave enough to feel something big, and it hadn't worked out. And that was sad, but it said nothing about me. I was fine. I was, in fact, quite evolved for processing it so gracefully. Then I was out with my friend Ria for drinks. By the way, it's also an anonymous name. She had heard the Luca version, the beautiful, cinematic, tragic version. She'd also met Daniel once at a dinner, and she had quietly filed him away. We were halfway through a bottle of Grauburgunder. By the way, I don't know what that drink is. If you know the drink, please write it down in the comments to tell others about it. When she put her glass down and looked at me in the specific way, that means someone is about to say something. They have been holding for 3 months. Oof. Then she said, "Can I say something?" And then I said, "You're going to anyway." And then she said, "You know what I think? I think you went to Berlin and you found someone who wanted you, actually wanted you, in a real, boring, Tuesday evening way. And you found another man who was 5 days long and thousands of miles away. And you picked the one who couldn't reach you." She paused. "I've watched you do this before, not always with men, but with situations. I think when something actually offers itself to you, you go somewhere else in your head. I think you have fearful attachment, and I think you might want to look into it." Wow, what a great friend, Marco. I was going to call you Luca. Sorry about that. I went home and typed fearful attachment into my phone and sat on the edge of my bed, reading until 1 in the morning. Wow. Everything I read felt like reading my own diary. So let's stop here a little bit. Let's talk about fearful attachment because not so many people talk about it, especially in the queer spaces, in the queer dating spaces, especially. So most of us heard about anxious attachment, which is like needing constant reassurance, the fear of abandonment. And also we also heard about avoidant attachment, which is like pulling back, needing distance, commitment issues, difficulty with closeness. Fearful attachment is kind of like the combination of both at the same time. So it's sometimes also called like disorganized attachment. So the fearful attached person desperately wants love and is also deeply terrified of it. So it's, yeah, two-faced. So they move toward closeness. And when they have it, then they start sabotaging it. They chase people who are out of reach because it's a safe way to want. You know, The unavailable person will keep them close to the feeling of love and being wanted, but then without really ever being close enough to the reality of love. So what makes this particularly common in gay men is a few things. So a lot of us grew up learning that the love we wanted was shameful, was something dangerous, was something wrong. We learned to want it in secret. We learned to want from a distance. We trained ourselves years and years and years very early on to desire things we weren't supposed to have. That pattern doesn't disappear when you just come out. It just finds new targets. It comes out in new shapes, in new forms. The men who can't give you what you want feel familiar. They feel like home, the man who actually offers himself, steady, available, genuinely interested. That man activates a terror that has nothing to do with with his personality or him personally. It has to do with what you learned love meant and what you learned you deserved. So this is not a flaw, it's just a wound, and wounds, fortunately, can be healed. So let's continue the story. All right. This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you I immediately went into therapy and did the work, and now I'm in a healthy relationship. Okay, so he fast forwarded. But that's not quite what happened. What happened is I sat with it. I sat with it for a long time. I let myself understand slowly that the story I'd been telling, that I just hadn't found the right person yet, that I was unlucky with timing, that the men I wanted kept disappointing me, was a story I had built very carefully to avoid a simpler one. The simpler one is I had been afraid. I had been afraid of being held, of being known, of being chosen in an ordinary, reliable way by someone who would still be there on a Tuesday in January when nothing was glamorous and nothing was new. Luca was safe because he was impossible. The distance was the whole point. What I grieved wasn't him. I barely knew him. I grieved the idea of him, which I could curate endlessly without him ever being close enough to contradict it. Daniel, on the other hand, terrified me because he was real, because he texted back, because he walked me to my door and said clearly what he wanted, because there was nothing to interpret, no delay to fill with fantasy, no ambiguity to manage. He just offered himself, and I didn't know how to hold something that wasn't struggling to get away. I want to be honest about what that realization cost me. There's a specific kind of grief in understanding that you were the problem in your own story, not a convenient, forgivable kind of problem, a deep structural one, the kind that means some things you lost because of you. I let myself grieve that. And then, and this is the part that took the longest, I started to ask what it would mean to be safe in my own body, to be the kind of person who could receive love without immediately looking for the exit. I started therapy. I started paying attention to the relief. Every time I felt that strange release when something kind and available backed away, I made myself name it out loud. You did that. That was fear, not indifference. I stopped performing heartbreak on Instagram. I stopped chasing the almost. I'm not going to pretend I immediately became available and whole, but I stopped confusing unavailability for passion. I stopped punishing the men who showed up for the crime of showing up. And somewhere in that, quietly, without fanfare, I started to become someone who could be loved. Wow. I'm so moved by this. I really want to sit for a moment in this final piece of the story. Because what Marco described at the end, that shift from understanding to actually changing, that's the most important part. You know, insight is the beginning of healing, but it's not healing itself. Knowing your attachment style is helpful in the healing journey, but it doesn't heal it. You know, understanding why you do a certain thing doesn't automatically stop you from doing it. You'll do it again and again and again. But it's the, let's call it the beginning of the journey. Like understanding where something is coming from is really like holding the beginning of the rope. And the rope, if you keep following it along the way, it gets you to healing. So the work should go deeper than the mind. It goes into the body, the nervous system, the subconscious belief that's been running things for years and years. The belief is usually something like, love is dangerous. Real closeness will destroy me. I am safest at almost. I am unworthy of real love, I'm unworthy of real love. I'm not enough. My love is shameful, so I shouldn't have it. My love is wrong. Even if we're out, even if we have accepted ourselves, but these beliefs that we curated over our childhood and teenage and adolescent years, these beliefs, they don't just disappear. They are there. If we don't find out what they are and work on them, they are still there. So healing means is replacing this belief. So when you start believing, okay, I deserve love, like not just saying it out loud, but you really truly believe it. Like if you meet someone who's unavailable, even if you're extremely attracted to them physically, healing means like it's the ability to stop and be like, no, if you can't show up for me, I'm out, even if you are the most beautiful man I'll ever be with. That's healing. And that requires teaching your nervous system that safety and desire can coexist. That a man who texts back isn't threatening. That being chosen doesn't have to mean being trapped. It doesn't have to mean it's boring. What becomes possible on the other side of that work? Everything that seemed flat before starts to feel like richness. You start appreciating these little details, like this Tuesday evening on the couch watching Netflix while it's raining cats and dogs outside, And this closeness feels like the relief, this consistency. It stops feeling boring and starts feeling like a relief, actual relief, not the relief of escape. You stop needing the hit of the almost. You stop needing the chase. So I have so many stories with that actually from my clients. I really I help men who are going through stuff like that, who want to uncover these patterns, uncover these beliefs, and get rid of them at at the deepest level possible. So if this is landing for you, if you're hearing yourself in Marco's story, come and talk to me. I give free consultation. We can see if we work together, or it can just be healing on to come on this show and share your story, and we can discuss it. Like just there are so many resources. There's a blog section on my website, the free consultation, my full program. If you decide to move forward with it, your next chapter doesn't have to look like the last one. So I had a follow-up message from Marco. So he's basically still doing the work, he told me. That's been in a kind of like quiet grief for the version of himself that spent years constructing elaborate reasons not to be loved. He said it's uncomfortable knowing this, but it's less uncomfortable than just another rooftop party and another Luca. So here's what I want you to take from today's story. The problem is almost like it can be the other man, but it's your own life. Take responsibility for your own life. If you meet an unavailable person and this unavailable person treats you like shit, sorry for my language, yes, they need to work on themselves too, but you in the first place accepted this person. You kept going after them, you kept chasing them. So at the end of the story, it's almost never the man, it's almost never the timing or the distance or the fact that everyone good is either taken or straight. The problem when it keeps, especially, it's not about those things if the problem keeps repeating itself. Different faces, but the same result. So if today's episode moved something in you, please share it with someone. One share can really reach the person who needs to hear this, who needs to stop performing heartbreak for 2 years and doesn't know why. Follow the show, please, also, because that would really help keeping the show going. It would really help keeping this a space for people to share their stories, whether anonymously or coming up on the show and sharing them. And I actually have a submission. I'm not so sure yet if I want to say it, but in the next solo episode, I don't know if that will be the next episode directly, but in the next solo episode, I might share it. It's a bit darker. It's actually very interesting, but it's kind of a 7-year relationship with a man who never once in 7 years introduced him to his family. So I'm not going to give you more spoilers, but let's see. Maybe I do that, maybe another one. Let's see, submit your stories. Let's see. Maybe I find another even more interesting story that I can share. So, but until then, I'm Lene, and this is Ghosted, Gagged, and Gay. Go be brave, but most importantly, be kind to yourselves and to each other. Even if you realize there's something you need to work on, be kind to yourself. Being harsh on yourself is not going to get you anywhere on the healing journey. So until then, have a nice week, day, whatever you are, wherever you are living, and until next time. Bye bye.